All right, so I just have to rant about this because I was watching the John Campea show and they were discussing how Kathleen Kennedy is out at Lucasfilm. So she's no longer in charge of Star Wars. And she was hired into the role in 2013 and given the keys to the sequel trilogy, which was completely botched. And, as John Campea's talking about this, he's like, well, she kind of has a mixed legacy as the studio head of Lucasfilm. There's some good things, there's some bad things, but her movies made a lot of money. They made billions of dollars.
I think when we look back at the legacy of Kathleen Kennedy, it's going to be a mixed bag. On the one hand, she was kind of steering the ship during the most divisive time of Star Wars fandom. How much she deserves the blame for that is up for debate. Maybe a lot, maybe a little, whatever. But that'll be a part of it. However, she was also overseeing it when it cranked out the most profitable Star Wars films of all time, at least in terms of box office. How many of the films hit $1 billion? 4 of the films hit $1 billion. Only one of her feature films did not. She was in charge when beloved shows such as Mandalorian got developed. She was the one, again, all credit where it's due. She was the one who came up with the idea to pair Jon Favreau with Dave Filoni and said, I think the two of you together are going to be able to really shape this Mandalorian story out.
And it's like, no, here's the reality of Kathleen Kennedy. Her tenure as Lucasfilm was a complete and utter disaster. There is no two ways about it. Think about this. She was given the best job in Hollywood, like maybe ever. She was given the keys to not only create a sequel trilogy to the most acclaimed Hollywood franchise of all time, Star Wars, but the ability to do a number of spin-off series, solo films, etc. And what did she do with the sequel trilogy? What was her master plan? Her master plan was to have no plan, to hire two people that completely disagreed. One went left, one went right. One's up, one's down. They just completely disagreed on everything. That's, of course, J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson, and said, hey, you guys fulfill your own creative visions and just do what you want to do. So then you get Episode 7, which is this nostalgia trip to the old series, and then Episode 8 comes, which is a deconstruction of the entire Episode 7 and 4, 5, 6, everything. It's like nothing that you know is real. Jedis don't exist. Were evil the whole time. Which is like, whatever. I mean, I'm not going to get into it. And then it's just very jarring. And then it's back to Episode 9, back to nostalgia. Oh, the Emperor's back. It's like, what? They did not plan anything. And whose fault is that, by the way? Is it Rian Johnson's fault? No, it is not Rian Johnson's fault. It is Kathleen Kennedy's fault for allowing that to happen. And I've said repeatedly, a lot of people either love Rian Johnson's Episode 8 or they hate it. But here's the thing that I've said on Twitter is that I would have rather seen J.J. Abrams do all three or Rian Johnson do all three than what we got. What we got was the worst. It was the worst amalgamation of creative visions because there was no creative vision. It's just a constant clash of ideas. If Rian Johnson had just been doing the whole we're going to deconstruct the whole series bit or what he was trying to do the whole time, then okay, that would have been one thing. If J.J. Abrams just had done a nostalgia kind of sequel rehash, that would have been one thing. But let's take a look at what the sequel trilogy actually was. And I enjoy watching Episode 7. Episode 8 is kind of enjoyable to watch as well. It's a pretty well-made film. Episode 9 is kind of dog shit. But with Episode 7, for instance, I watched it recently. I actually watched it with the orchestra playing over it, like a live orchestra doing the score, and the score is quite good in it, and the film is pretty solid. But you think about it, and first of all, like our OG heroes, Luke, Leia, Han, they don't even really interact in the sequel trilogy. Like, think about this. If you were in charge of the sequel trilogy, would you have done it the way that they elected to do it? Where, like, Luke, Han, and Leia basically never interact. I mean, Leia and Han meet, like, a few times, and they don't like each other, and they're just mad the whole time. Luke never sees Leia, unfortunately, because of the passing of Carrie Fisher, obviously. And Han, and it's just like, it's bizarre what they did with not giving. It's like they kind of did nostalgia, but at the same point, it was like the worst nostalgia trip ever. It's like nostalgia without actually giving the fans what they wanted. So they put a heavy emphasis on the new characters, which I thought they were all likable, to be honest. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and be one of the people that like shit on Rey or Finn. I think that they're fairly likable characters. I didn't think that there was anything wrong with them, and I think that they're fine. Again, the problem was the conflicting visions and the lack of oversight. And again, that goes to Kathleen Kennedy. That's not an individual filmmaker's fault. You give an individual filmmaker $200 million and they make their movie that they want to make. But if you don't give them any guardrails or parameters of saying, okay, this is where we want to go. Episode 7 is more or less going to cover these story beats. And then episode 8, this is going to happen. And then episode 9, this is going to happen. Instead, it seems that there was no vision whatsoever. Kathleen Kennedy basically delegated and deferred all responsibility to the filmmakers and said, okay, you guys have to make this work. And by the way, I mean, she put J.J. Abrams in a terrible position to come in episode 9 because, you know, he had set up a solid framework for the sequel trilogy. Again, not really mind-blowing, nothing like incredible, but a pretty well-made, solid film that definitely, again, my biggest complaint of it is that it didn't really deliver. I would have liked to see like Han, Leia, and Luke interact more, and obviously Luke doesn't say a word in the whole movie. But I can forgive that because it's like, okay, episode 8 might come, and then we might actually get to see a little bit more, and it might be able to expand upon that. But Rian Johnson's whole thing was like, no, Star Wars is fake, Jedis are fake, midichlorians don't exist, even though like the guy who created this entire thing said it did. And I know everybody gets all triggered about the midichlorians, but it's like, dude, this whole thing was George Lucas's idea. He created it. It's his thing. So who are we to fucking tell him that midichlorians, oh, they don't exist? Like, that's just kind of dumb in my opinion. I mean, he's the one that made all this shit up. But you know, and I compare the prequel trilogy to the sequel trilogy, right? And everybody shits on the prequels all the time. They shit on Jar Jar. They shit on the Trade Federation debates and this and that. I think the prequels are not only better than the sequels, I think it's substantially better, night and day better. Because you look at the prequel films and they have a beginning, middle, and an end. The beginning, Luke is 8 years old. Or not Luke. Anakin's 8 years old. Middle, he's a Padawan, you know, in training. And then the final episode, he's obviously becoming Darth Vader in the very early stages of becoming Darth Vader. There's an arc for Obi-Wan. There's an arc for the Trade Federation and the Republic. Like, all that stuff is fleshed out. It has a beginning, middle, and an end. Same with like Count Dooku's arc. It is a very well-made, cogent plot. And you can disagree with some of the execution with the CGI and some of the other things that were flawed about it. It would have been nice to have CGI that was a little bit better, I think, especially when you see people like what James Cameron and Chris Nolan were. I mean, look at James Cameron, what he was doing in 1997 with Titanic, or what he was doing even in the 80s with Terminator. In some ways, kind of looked better than than how the Phantom Menace looked in the in 1999. But either way, guys, I mean, you really look at it, and he had a vision. And you might disagree with the vision, and that's exactly what George Lucas said. That's why I respect him so much, because, you know, people would say, people would tell him, why did you make Anakin so young in episode 1? Why'd you make him like a kid? He should have been like a teenager. And you know what he said? He said, that's the way I wanted to do it. It was my vision. That's the way I wanted to do it. And fuck, I respect that, because Kathleen Kennedy was playing the game of like, well, I don't know. Rian Johnson has some good ideas, and J.J. Abrams has some good ideas. And, so, yeah, I mean, this thing that John Campea said about how her legacy is a mixed bag. No, it's not. It's not a mixed bag. It is a giant, colossal L. And here's the thing is that John Campea also mentioned, is he was saying, well, you know, and I don't mean to mock John Campea. I like him. I listen to his show pretty frequently. I like most of his takes and agree with most of what he says. But, you know, on this issue, I think he's like a little skewed because Kathleen Kennedy is a famed producer, and that's fine. But look, a bricklayer might not be a good plumber, right? So she's a good bricklayer. She's a good producer. She's not a fucking studio head. Damn sure she's not that. And we saw that. And the product speaks for itself. But anyway, so going back to Kathleen Kennedy's impact on everybody's like, well, what about the movies we like? What about Rogue One? That was good. What about Mandalorian? That was good. It's like, okay, two things. One, you're working with literally the most prized franchise in Hollywood history. You could make a series that's just Darth Vader breathing for an hour straight, and it would make $1 billion at the box office. So the fact that it's like, oh, it made a lot of money or whatever is kind of irrelevant. Of course it's going to make money. Of course the shit is going to get eyeballs. Of course people are going to like it. Of course people are going to give it the benefit of the doubt. It's fucking Star Wars. Of course we're going to. But the fact of it is, guys, you can only do a sequel trilogy once. And Kathleen Kennedy ruined it. It does not matter that Mandalorian season 2 is good. It does not matter. It's the sequel trilogy. The core Skywalker saga is what matters the most. And she fucking ruined it. She absolutely ruined it. And again, it is solely her fault. It is not Rian Johnson's fault. It is not J.J. Abrams' fault. It is Kathleen Kennedy's fault. She did not step in. She did not oversee a cogent, coherent vision. She did not execute properly. And it was a complete and utter failure. After, by the way, a good, albeit kind of milquetoast, average installment with episode 7. It didn't blow anybody away. But, again, episode 8 and 9 could have addressed some of the issues that I had with it. But instead, there was no story. Really, look back at the sequel trilogy. There's no story. Nothing happens in the movies. There is no beginning, middle, and end. It is utter nonsense. And it's very, very unfortunate that she squandered that once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to get Harrison Ford, Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher back, and really, really do something special. Because, by the way, for episode, obviously Carrie Fisher couldn't be in episode 9, really, but episode 7 and 8, you did. So, or did she die between episode 7 and 8? I can't remember. Anyway, look, it was really disappointing to see what had happened. Yeah, she did die between episode 7 and 8, now that I think about it. But it was really disappointing, and it comes down to Kathleen Kennedy, and it's such a bummer because you could only make the sequel trilogy one time, and I really wish that we could have seen George Lucas's vision. He had turned in some treatments and scripts, and they basically threw them out. And in exchange for what? Like, it's not like they had a better idea. It's not like they had anything better to operate off of. It's not like they had any other grand vision that was completely... They didn't have any vision at all. And that's what was so disappointing about this. And to put J.J. Abrams in the very awkward position to mold between what had happened between episode 7 and 8, which were... Episode 8 was Rian Johnson just undoing what episode 7 was and what George Lucas had done episode 1 through 6. And then episode 9, it's like, oh, we're celebrating the whole saga. We're going to make it all blend together. It was a nightmare, guys. I mean, so my point is this, is that as much as people look at the box office numbers that the films made, and as much as people look at the successful spin-off movies and shows, and the Obi-Wan show was okay. It was pretty good. As much as people talk about those things, guys, she fucked up the most important thing. The most important thing was the 3 movies. That was the conclusion of the Skywalker saga. That is what mattered. And she completely fucked it up. And that blame falls solely on her. Falls solely on her. Again, I'm not going to sit here and tweet and yell at Rian Johnson because he made the exact movie that he wanted to make. He did exactly what he wanted to do. And really, as a filmmaker, that is the test of your skill. A shitty filmmaker will have amazing ideas in their head. They'll have this grand vision and it looks so good in their mind, and then the movie is shit. An amazing filmmaker will portray the film exactly as they see it in their head, and it will come to life on the big screen, and the audience will get to see that vision. And a good director can actualize that vision. They can make it a reality. And I think Rian Johnson did that. The film is well shot. It's well directed. The script is pretty good. It's shot well again. The cinematography is good. Action set pieces are good. I quite like the color, the way the colors look. The color grading in the film is good. I think Rian Johnson made the exact movie that he wanted to make. I really do. I don't think he did a bad job doing, bringing his vision to life. The fault was in Kathleen Kennedy and allowing that to happen if it conflicted with what JJ wanted to do, which I guess she kind of sided with him in the end because episode 9 undid episode 8. And it was just a nightmare. And again, that falls on Kathleen Kennedy. So it's good her tenure's over, but it's really, really unfortunate that we can't get back. We can't get back the sequel trilogy. You can't just retcon it. You can't do it again. Carrie Fisher's gone. Mark Hamill, and I think Harrison Ford is definitely done now. Although we said that the first time, but I think that he's definitely done. So you fucking ruined it. So thanks, Kathleen, for that. Good. Well done.